My wife Lila was back in London again, indulging in yet another shopping spree. Lately, she seemed to spend more and more time away from home with each passing year. Whatever we had once called a marriage no longer existed, but a divorce was financially out of reach for me, and Lila showed no interest in pursuing one either. Over the last 5 years, my software company had finally taken off. For more than a decade, I had struggled just to keep us afloat. But then the hardware technology caught up with my software innovations, and everything changed. The business skyrocketed. 3 major companies had expressed interest in acquiring it, and I was waiting for the best offer. The company's value now exceeded $10 million, most of which was tied up in stock that I owned. 8 years ago, Lila had been working for a legal firm in Reading. At the time, her paycheck was a significant help, given our financial struggles. Her long hours often extended into overnight trips for the firm, even though she was just a paralegal. I was so consumed with my software development that I didn't think much of her absences. Up until then, everything had been fine between us. Our intimate life was fulfilling, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company, even with my unpredictable work schedule. But about a year into her job at the law firm, everything began to change. Our intimacy dwindled until it was nearly non-existent, and our relationship became nothing more than platonic. I was unhappy with the shift, but assumed it was just a phase she was going through. Our 2 sons, Kevin and John, were both in high school at the time, and they were largely self-sufficient. Kevin was preparing for Penn State, while John had set his sights on joining the Marines. Lila's boss at Burke's Legal was Bryce Logan. I met him and his wife a few times at company events, and he seemed like an ordinary, decent guy. Then one day, Lila came home visibly upset. She told me that Bryce had been shot and killed by his wife. She didn't elaborate, and shortly after, she quit her job at the firm and never worked again. Unfortunately, quitting her job didn't improve our marriage. If anything, things worsened. Lila became irritable and argumentative. I wish I could say she had some redeeming qualities, but I honestly couldn't think of any. I did my best to avoid her, but it wasn't always possible. Keto complicate matters further. She announced that she was pregnant. I hoped the new baby might bring us closer, but I was wrong. Lila named our daughter Jenna, and while she adored the baby and doted on her constantly, our relationship continued to deteriorate. As Jenna grew older, Lila started spending even more time away from home. With the company doing so well, we moved into a new house and hired live-in staff, including a nanny for Jenna. Lila took full advantage of the arrangement. I never questioned where she went or why she spent so much money, but it frustrated me. Fortunately, I was earning more than she could spend, though it didn't make her behavior any easier to tolerate. I tried several times to talk to her about what went wrong between us, but she always shut me down. Separate bedrooms only added to the distance between us. I didn't even know what I had done wrong, so I had no idea how to fix it. Eventually, I just gave up. A divorce would cost me millions and likely destroy the company, so I stayed. It angered me that I had allowed things to reach this point. Jenna, however, became my source of joy. I spent as much time with her as possible, though Lila often tried to keep us apart. Thankfully, with Lila gone so frequently, Jenna and I became close. We shared a bond that we kept secret from Lila, and Jenna seemed to love the time we spent together. Now in 3rd grade, she was thriving in school, and I made it a point to attend her PTA meetings and teacher conferences, things Lila was usually too busy for. Kevin and John were both doing great on their own, with Kevin excelling at Penn State and John thriving in the Marines. Despite my miserable marriage, my kids were my silver lining. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Alicia Logan was sitting in my office, waiting for me. Her presence shocked me. I thought she was still in prison for killing her husband. She looked remarkable. Her shoulder-length hair was a striking blend of gray, silver, and black, and she wore very little makeup, her skin appearing smooth yet firm. Her natural eyebrows framed her face perfectly, giving her an air of both strength and femininity. "Alicia, this is quite the surprise," I said. "You look, well." "Thanks, Adrian. I wasn't sure you'd even remember me. It's been 8 years, after all. I figured I'd be long forgotten by now. Would you mind if I had some coffee?" "Of course. Black, right?" She nodded, and I continued. "Alicia, I have to say, I'm in an awkward spot here. I know about your situation, and I don't want to say anything that might upset you. If I cross any lines, just let me know. Adrian, I've been in prison for the last 8 years. I've developed a pretty thick skin. Don't worry about my feelings." she said with a faint smile. By the way, how's Mrs. Bishop? Not a topic I really want to discuss, I replied. Let's just say things could be better. I'm sorry to hear that, Alicia said, her tone softening. But that's actually why I'm here. I need to talk to you about Lila. I'm not here out of revenge or to be vindictive, but there are some things that I believe need closure. I placed the steaming cup of coffee in front of Alicia, but chose to sit in the chair beside my desk rather than behind it. I wanted her to feel at ease while she shared whatever she needed to say. Pressing the intercom button, I instructed my secretary not to disturb us. Adrian, did you follow the trial at all? She began. No, I admitted. Lila mentioned what happened, but I wasn't particularly interested. I was knee-deep in launching the business, and Lila wasn't very talkative about it. I guess she was more upset over his death than I realized. Alicia looked at me intently. More upset than you would imagine. From what I gather, you really have no idea what was going on back then. What I'm about to tell you might be shocking. She paused, giving me a moment to absorb the warning. You said earlier that you didn't want to upset me. Well, I feel the same way. I'll explain everything, but if it becomes too much, just let me know, and I'll stop. Maybe we should have gone with scotch instead of coffee, I quipped, attempting to lighten the mood. We both chuckled softly, but her expression quickly turned serious. The day I shot Bryce, she began, her voice steady but firm, he was planning to leave me. He was going to run away with Lila. He stopped by our house just long enough to hand me divorce papers. Your wife was waiting in the car. After dealing with me, they planned to come see you. My stomach churned, but I stayed quiet. Alicia continued. I had known about their affair for some time. I had documentation, even photos. I wasn't surprised he wanted a divorce. I'd been planning the same thing myself. Alicia, I had no idea, I said, shaking my head. I was completely oblivious, caught up in my own world. I suppose I'm partly to blame for everything that happened. If I'd been a better husband, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled the way they did. I'm truly sorry if my shortcomings added to your pain. She waved off my apology. There's more, Adrian. Bryce always wanted children, and we never had any. He blamed me entirely for that. When he handed me those divorce papers, he told me that Lila was pregnant with his child, that she was going to give him the family he'd always dreamed of. I turned to walk away, trying to keep my composure, but he wouldn't stop. He hurled insults at me, degrading me, making me feel less than human. It was relentless. Her voice grew quieter as she said, I don't remember reaching into the buffet drawer. I don't remember grabbing the revolver. All I know is I snapped, and then it was over. I struggled to find my words. Are you telling me that Jenna is Bryce's child? No, Alicia replied quickly, shaking her head. Jenna isn't Bryce's daughter, but I imagine Lila believes she is. How is that possible? I asked, confused. Alicia leaned forward slightly. I had myself thoroughly checked by several doctors over the years, and they never found anything wrong with me. Eventually, I had Bryce's sperm tested. He was completely sterile, Adrian. I never told him. By the way, Jenna was the name of Bryce's mother. I assume it was the name they agreed on when Lila discovered she was pregnant. My mind reeled. Lila picked the name, but I had no idea where it came from. That makes sense now. She must truly believe Jenna is Bryce's child. It does explain a lot, doesn't it? Alicia said with a faint smile. Would you like more coffee? No, thank you, I replied, shaking my head. But I'd like to hear the rest of what you have to say. Are you sure you're okay to continue? We're fine. Don't worry about a thing, she said confidently. That's the luxury of being the boss. Alicia reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the desk. When I went to prison, everything in the house was put into storage, including Bryce's briefcase. I was going through it last week and found this. She slid the folder toward me. Inside were the original divorce papers that Lila had planned to present to me the day Bryce was killed. They were signed, dated, and notarized. Is this still valid? I asked, scanning the documents. Alicia laughed. I wouldn't know. I'm not a lawyer, but you might want to check out paragraph 7. I flipped to the indicated section. My stomach sank as I read the clause. It granted Lila full custody of all children. The thought struck me. If Lila ever found out that I could take custody of Jenna, it would drive her absolutely mad. The boys were already out of the house and living their lives, but if I got her precious angel, she would lose her mind. Can I keep this so my legal team can review it? I asked, holding up the divorce papers. It's yours, Adrian, Alicia said with a shrug. They have no value to me anymore. I wish you luck with it." She then handed me 2 manila envelopes. "These might interest you, or they might not. The smaller envelope contains photos my private investigator took. They're, well, intimate. I have no use for them, but you might find them valuable. The larger envelope has the results of the investigation and some other papers. You can go through them and decide what's relevant." "Thank you," I replied, though the idea of looking at those photos made me uneasy. "I'll hand everything over to my lawyer and let him deal with it." We sat in silence for a few moments, just looking at each other. There was something about Alicia, her strength, her honesty. She was an impressive woman, and I was grateful she had come to see me. "I'd better let you get back to work," she said finally, standing up. "Thanks for taking the time to meet with me. It feels good to tie up these loose ends. By the way, you don't happen to have any job openings for an ex-con, do you?" A few days later, I handed the divorce papers and Alicia's envelopes to my favorite lawyer, Zane Abbott. Zane was thrilled, practically bouncing with excitement as he examined the 8-year-old divorce documents. Since they had no expiration date, they were still legally valid. "This is incredible," Zane said, grinning like a kid in a candy store. "She didn't even ask for percentages, just hard numbers. She wanted $114,000 from your accounts, which might have been half back then, but it's practically pocket change now. The rest is similar." There was, however, one minor complication. Lila had demanded the 1995 Volvo station wagon she'd been driving at the time. The problem? I had sold that car 5 years ago. With a little help from some friends at the DMV, I tracked it down to a frat boy at State College. He was more than happy to sell it back to me for double what he'd paid. A week later, I had the new title transferred into Lila's name, just as the original divorce terms required. Zane assured me that as long as nothing was altered in the original filing, the divorce could be processed as written. Lila's notarized signature was still valid, even after 8 years. I signed in my place, and Zane's notary applied the seal. Now, all we had to do was wait. Time seemed to crawl by as we awaited the results. My relationship with Lila remained as cold and distant as ever, but my bond with Jenna grew stronger each day. We kept our DNA test a secret from Lila while we waited for the results, which I felt confident would confirm that Jenna was my biological daughter. In the meantime, my connection with Alicia Logan also deepened. I offered her an entry-level position in the software testing division of the company. It was a role I thought she would feel comfortable in, and it gave us the chance to see each other regularly. I genuinely liked Alicia and wanted to get to know her better, though I was careful not to do anything that might raise eyebrows at work. About a month later, I invited Alicia to lunch on a day off. It was casual and completely without pressure, and I assured her that I wouldn't do anything that could make her position at the company uncomfortable. She smiled and told me, "My relationship with you matters more to me than the job." Her words gave me hope, but I wasn't in any rush to push things forward. During those weeks, I made several attempts to talk to Lila about our marriage. Every time, she flatly refused to engage in any discussion or answer my questions. I didn't tell her that her old petition for divorce was being processed in the background. Soon enough, she would receive notice that it was finalized. It was midweek, a typical workday, when my loving wife, Lila, burst into my office, her face red with anger. Without hesitation, she slammed a stack of official-looking papers onto my desk. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice laced with venom. "I'm not entirely sure," I replied calmly, glancing at the papers. "But I believe it's the divorce request you filed 8 years ago, now finalized." "You son of a—" she spat, cutting herself off. "You can't do this. Everything has changed since then. If you think I'm going to let you get away with this, you're out of your mind." "What has changed, Lila?" I asked, my voice steady. "Just because your lover passed away doesn't mean we couldn't proceed with the divorce. I agreed to all your terms back then, so you don't have a leg to stand on. If you want to contest it, get a lawyer. And while you're at it, I'd like you to gather your belongings and move out of my house, which, by the way, you signed over to me." "Oh, I'll gladly leave your house," she yelled, "but I'll make sure this piece of trash divorce decree gets thrown out. You'll pay for this, Adrian, big time. Jenna and I will be gone this afternoon, and I'll send someone tomorrow to collect my things." "Sorry, Lila," I said, unfazed by her fury, "but if you read paragraph 7, you'll notice that you granted me full custody of Jenna. Until the matter is resolved, she's legally mine. If you attempt to take her without my consent, I'll have you arrested. That's a promise." Lila's rage reached its peak. Her face was flushed, her neck muscles taut, and the veins in her forehead bulged. Her lips quivered as she screamed a tirade of words, none of which I really processed. I just stood there, stunned by the sheer intensity of her outburst. Finally, she grabbed the papers and stormed out of my office, slamming the door behind her. The sudden silence was bliss. I let out a deep breath and leaned back in my chair, feeling a wave of relief. A moment later, my secretary entered, placed a cup of coffee on my desk, and smiled knowingly before leaving without a word. I spent the rest of the afternoon canceling Lila's cell phone, credit cards, bank accounts, and insurance policies. That evening, I called Alicia, and she agreed to join Jenna and me for dinner. It was a pleasant evening, with Jenna and Alicia chatting most of the time. Things didn't go exactly as planned, but it felt good to have some support. A few days later, Zane called with an update. Lila had retained legal counsel, and a meeting was scheduled to address the divorce and custody issues. A family judge would be present to act as an arbitrator. Zane noted that Lila's lawyer didn't seem confident about overturning the divorce decree. Instead, their focus appeared to be on gaining custody of Jenna. When the day of the meeting arrived, it began with a tedious review of the terms Lila had outlined in the original divorce filing. Zane handed over checks for the specified amounts, while Lila's lawyer voiced formal objections about the alleged unfairness of the settlements. Zane remained unbothered, responding to none of the protests. Lila seemed taken aback when I slid the car keys and title for the old Volvo station wagon across the table. Finally, the issue of custody came up. Lila requested to address the judge, who granted her permission. "For the past 8 years," she began, "I've forced myself to endure a loveless marriage for the sake of my daughter. I loved Bryce Logan with all my heart, and I was proud to give him the child his wife couldn't. Bryce Logan is the father of my daughter, not Adrian Bishop. Mr. Bishop has no rights whatsoever to Jenna, and I won't tolerate her being raised by someone who isn't her real father. I'm seeking sole custody of Jenna Bishop." The judge, who had been silent up until now, raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Bishop, are you saying that Jenna Bishop is the product of an adulterous relationship you had with Bryce Logan while you were married to Mr. Bishop?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lila replied, "though I'd hardly call it adultery. Bryce and I were soulmates. We never saw what we were doing as dirty or wrong. We were planning a future together when tragedy struck. Jenna is the living proof of our love, and I can't allow Mr. Bishop to have any contact with her." The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Bishop, your admission of infidelity in this matter would, under most circumstances, make your claim for custody less compelling. However, if your statement regarding the child's paternity is accurate, we may need to reevaluate." He then turned to Zane. "Mr. Abbott, do you have anything to offer?" Zane and I exchanged a brief glance. "Are you sure you want to proceed with this, Adrian?" he asked. "Yes," I replied firmly. "Let's do it." Zane pushed a single sheet of paper across the table to Lila's lawyer. "This report," Zane began, "was made approximately 6 weeks prior to the estimated conception date of Jenna Bishop. As you can see, it clearly states that Bryce Logan had a sperm count of 0. Mr. Logan was medically sterile and could not have fathered a child. That is the reason Alicia Logan, who is fertile, was never able to conceive," Zane continued, his tone calm and professional. Lila's face turned pale, her eyes widening in disbelief. Agitation took hold of her once again, just as it had in my office. "That's a lie!" she shouted, her voice trembling with desperation. "That report isn't real. You're making all this up just to take Bryce's child away from me." Her lawyer leaned over and whispered something in her ear, clearly trying to calm her down. After a few tense moments, Lila seemed to regain a small measure of composure, though her expression remained stricken. Zane slid 3 more documents across the table. "The first is a DNA analysis of Jenna Bishop," he explained. "The second is a DNA analysis of Adrian Bishop. The third is a comparison report that conclusively proves that Adrian Bishop is, without question, the biological father of Jenna Bishop. Are there any questions?" Lila was silent, her face crumbling as she absorbed the truth. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, and the anger drained from her entirely. Now, she was simply broken. Sobbing uncontrollably, she buried her face in her hands. Her lawyer requested a short recess, which the judge granted. After the break, Lila's lawyer conceded custody of Jenna, though he requested a visitation agreement. I agreed to let Lila have Jenna every other weekend and 2 holidays of her choice each year. Lila chose Christmas and Jenna's birthday. For the rest of the session, Lila sat quietly, saying nothing. I returned to work after the proceedings and left Zane to finalize the paperwork. I couldn't believe how smoothly it had all gone. Considering Lila's behavior over the years, I thought the outcome was more than fair. If she had been a better companion during our marriage, I might have been willing to share more of my success with her. I had never denied her anything, emotionally or materially. I was always ready to support her in any way I could, but it was clear that I had failed to meet her expectations as a partner. Even now, I still couldn't figure out what Bryce Logan had that I didn't, or what he offered Lila that I couldn't. The photos Alicia had provided didn't paint Bryce as anything remarkable in the physical department. To drive the point home, I sent Lila copies of the pictures and the private investigator's report. The latter included records of Bryce's motel meetings with other women, while he was also seeing Lila. I hoped she enjoyed reading that little revelation. Despite my curiosity, every attempt I had made to get an explanation from Lila had been stonewalled. The divorce left me with a lingering sense of failure, but I found solace in my growing bond with Jenna and my budding relationship with Alicia. Lila eventually moved in with Bryce's mother, Jenna, who had apparently become a close friend over the years. Unfortunately for Lila, the arrangement soured quickly. To support herself, she began selling off the jewelry and designer clothes she had accumulated at my expense. It didn't take long for her to realize that Bryce's mother was doing the exact same thing with her possessions. After 6 months, Lila packed up and moved in with her sister in Norristown. In the beginning, Lila faithfully picked up Jenna every other weekend as agreed. But over time, the excuses started. First, it was a last-minute work emergency. Then, she was feeling unwell. Her calls became more frequent, and her excuses became flimsier. Eventually, she stopped showing up altogether. Jenna didn't seem to mind when her mother canceled. Alicia and I always went out of our way to make it up to her, and the three of us grew closer as a result. We began to feel like a real family. Alicia eventually moved into the house, and just before Christmas, we got married. Over the holidays, Lila was on a singles cruise in the Caribbean and couldn't pick up Jenna as scheduled. No one complained about that. 2 weeks later, I filed to have the custody addendum removed, and the court approved it. Not long after, my company was purchased, bringing in a substantial windfall. Alicia was overjoyed, not only because of our financial success, but because, for the first time in her life, she was pregnant. We joked about how we'd be collecting Social Security by the time the baby finished high school, but none of that mattered. At last, life was good.